Welcome to With You Every Step, the solo travel podcast that explores, explains, and hopefully inspires you to travel the world by yourself. I'm your host, Michelle Lee. Welcome to With You Every Step. Mount Everest is the highest mountain in the world. Due to this, it draws an estimated 35,000 people every year to Mount Everest Base Camp. And between 700 to 1,000 people attempt to summit Mount Everest every year. Since my hike in Peru, where I unexpectedly summited a 5,000 meter mountain without knowing I was going to, I have been fascinated with mountaineers. This week, we celebrate International Women's Day. In honor of this, I have invited an inspirational woman to join us today. Allie Pepper has scaled to the summit of 3 8,000 meter high mountains, including Everest and Cho Oyu summit, without the use of supplementary oxygen. And there's only a very small amount of women in the world that have done this. Welcome, Allie.
Hi, Michelle.
I'm so happy to have you on today and pick your brains. I am very excited to hear all about everything that you have done.
Okay. I'll do my best.
Okay. So where did your love of wanting to climb mountains start?
So I didn't actually begin climbing, as in any type of climbing, until 1999.
Okay.
I was 24, I think. And I basically just had been traveling around the world. Since I left high school, I hadn't had like a career path. I didn't go to uni, that kind of thing. I'd just been traveling and having casual jobs. So I decided that I would do a course to try to find my way in life and a career path or some direction, I suppose.
Oh, okay. So you were feeling quite lost at that point.
I was feeling very lost. I had gone to India on a spiritual journey for 6 months, which took me to Nepal, in fact, for a month trekking. And I'd come home just a bit lost because I didn't feel I found myself on my journey and my travels. So, yeah, I went to the local TAFE and I looked at all of the brochures on the wall, and I was a bit of a hippie, well, a lot of a hippie, and I read a brochure wrong, and to me it said outdoor recreation.
Recreation, okay.
Well, I read it wrong because it was outdoor recreation. However, I was like, it's an omen, I need to do this. I love the outdoors and I want to recreate myself. So I first joined up this course in essentially rock climbing, canyoning, bushwalking, like guiding, okay, to become a guide. That actually sparked my passion, I suppose, for the outdoors, guiding and climbing. So that's when I first learnt that rock climbing existed. Even though I grew up in the Blue Mountains, which is the largest climbing area in Australia, I didn't really know about rock climbing. So I'd been in the middle of it my whole life and had no idea what was out there. I happened on that course to have an instructor who was a mountaineering guide, and he noticed how well I did with all the technical climbing and picked up the roping skills really quickly. And he offered that I could go on a mountaineering course in New Zealand.
Okay.
And so, of course, I jumped at the opportunity. Yeah, so I went to New Zealand, and I suppose that's where I discovered my passion for mountain climbing.
Wow, I had this image of you as a toddler, just climbing all over anything you could, and your parents trying to grab you constantly.
We had a backyard full of trees, and I did constantly climb trees.
Yeah, I have this image of you just climbing everything. So you never had a fear of heights?
I still have a fear. I always have had a fear. I think everyone has a fear of heights to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I first started abseiling or climbing, whatever, like the fear of heights was probably more real. But the more I did it, the more used to heights I got, I suppose, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, because I have seen some footage of you where you are walking over ladders and there is like a massive drop underneath you, and I think, makes me just not be able to breathe just watching that.
Yeah, the ladders that's in the ice fall of Everest, which I've done quite a few times because I've been through the ice fall on a number of like seasons. So I've gone to climb another mountain that's next to Everest. It shares the same route up Everest until quite high. So I've spent 3 seasons going up and down through the ice fall.
What's an ice fall?
From Everest Base Camp, you climb up through what's called the Khumbu Icefall and you get onto the Western Cwm, which is a valley in between 3 peaks. So on the left is Everest, in front is Lhotse, which is another 8,000 metre mountain, and on the right is a mountain called Nuptse, so it's just under 8,000 metres. What happens is all of the snow from those 3 mountains fill this valley, essentially, and that snow hardens and becomes ice. And the valley is fairly flat but slightly sort of tilting down. So that ice very slowly moves down the valley and it gets to a very sharp kind of cliff of an 800-metre drop, which is steep. So as that ice like tumbles down the slope, it breaks apart into big chunks of ice, or cliffs of ice, they're called seracs. And the spaces in between them are called crevasses. So that's the drop that you're looking at on the video that I walk across on a ladder.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's intense just watching it. Now, I've got heaps of questions to ask you about everything, but I want to go back to the start where your very first time where you decided. So you went to New Zealand?
Yep. That was at the end of 1999. So, yeah, I did my first mountaineering course. Straight after that course, what I did was one of the guys on the course, a young bloke, we decided to head off on our own. Like it would have been a few days later. Where we did the course was in the Mount Cook region, so up on the Tasman Glacier there. We hiked out and then we headed down to a place called Wanaka, which you may have heard of. And we packed our things and we went in to climb Mount Aspiring. So it's a different region. It's like the tallest mountain in that area. It's like a pyramid. It's really cool because it stands out above all the other mountains kind of thing.
Yeah, and how high is that mountain?
It's a good question.
Okay.
It's 3,000 something.
Okay, yeah, so it's still pretty high.
The highest mountain in New Zealand is Mount Cook. That's 3,800, but I lost a chunk off the top of it. And it's less than that now. But anyhow, so 3,000 something. I'm going to guess around 3,300.
Okay.
But it's super technical, snow and ice and rock kind of thing. And yeah, so we just went in to climb the mountain on our own, and we had to figure out our way through all the crevasses, climbing over rock with our crampons on.
What is that you just said?
Crampons?
Yeah, what's a crampon? It sounds like another word, but yes, what is a crampon?
I know exactly what you were thinking. What, a crampon? You put them on your boots.
Oh, they're those spiky things.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's what helps you climb ice and hard snow.
Oh, okay. So that would have been really helpful for me in Peru, I'm guessing.
Yeah, probably. If you're on snow and you're at any angle, then you need them.
Yeah, well, we were not prepared at all because we didn't know that's what we were doing and we didn't expect to be in a hail thunderstorm. So I just had normal little hiking boots on that weren't even waterproof. So, yeah.
If you're hiking on a track, like I use these in Nepal, what's called like a trekking crampon, which just slips over the top of your hiking boot, and that's got little spikes on the bottom of it. I use them as well when you don't have like a rigid mountaineering boot.
Uh-huh.
So they're quite handy for trekking.
Yeah, okay.
Hmm.
What's the difference between like trekking, hiking, and climbing?
Trekking and hiking are the same thing, because just depends what country you live in, what you call it. Because, for example, in New Zealand, they say tramping, and in Australia, we say bushwalking. And then if we're talking about other areas, we say trekking, but it's the same thing. Okay.
Yeah, okay. That's good to know.
Yeah, typically, and that's a good point. Like, typically, you would use your hiking shoes to trek.
Yeah.
Or sneakers to bushwalk. However, climbing, the line between trekking and climbing often doesn't get understood, because people refer to certain peaks as trekking peaks. I don't know if you've heard that before.
Yeah.
I guess the person who doesn't know too much about climbing would assume a trekking peak is just a peak that you can walk up in a pair of sneakers or hiking boots.
Uh-huh.
However, trekking peaks often get called trekking peaks when they're up to 7,000 metres.
Okay, no, I would not be wearing runners or sneakers up that high.
It's not the appropriate footwear because of the cold. And like we already talked about, there would be typically snow and ice higher up, of course, because there's a permanent glacier. I guess like it's a hard one, because you can say trekking at altitude, but if it involves putting on crampons and using ice axes and that kind of thing, it probably turns more into a climb.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does make sense. So trekking is something, I kind of would think that a trek is like a day trip, and climbing is like something that you're going for a long time.
Yeah, well, you can certainly do like a multi-day trek, like in Nepal, where you trek over high passes which have glaciers on them. So that would still be trekking, because the glacier is fairly flat that you cross, but you would put your trekking crampons on your shoes.
Okay.
So, and often we have used an ice axe for crossing passes like that. Climbing, I guess, climbing skills can involve using ropes as well. It's a difficult thing to say what to climb and what to trek sometimes, because the lines get crossed a little, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but if someone calls you a trekker, do you kind of get a bit offended? I mean, like, no, I'm a climber.
Well, the mountains I climb are a little bit more than trekking, let's just say. But climbing itself has got so many facets. So there's ice climbing, rock climbing, mixed climbing, and within each genre of climbing, there's various levels and grades as well. So it gets quite complicated.
Yeah, okay. All right. So you don't, yeah, all right. I was going to say, I think it would be offensive if someone called you a trekker when you're like, I've climbed Mount Everest. Thank you very much.
I actually don't get offended, because I don't know. I feel like I've done enough of it that I would just laugh.
Yeah.
And, you know, in terms of like climbing, like there's people out there that do way, way harder climbing routes than I do on certain mountains that I go to climb, for example, because there's always the easiest way to the top, and there's the hardest way, and there's middle ways, you know. So people do pioneer extremely difficult, hard, vertical to overhanging lines up mountains.
Okay, my question to that is why?
Why do they do it?
Yeah, like why take the hardest way if there's an easier way to get the same point? If it's life-threatening, which a lot of them can be.
Yeah, I suppose at the end of the day, like in any sport, you have the elite climbers that are out there on the cutting edge, you know, trying to take the sport to the next level in any sport.
Yeah, but the risk of death in this sport is extremely high.
Risk of death in that genre, so in the climbing new routes technical routes on 8,000 meter mountains without oxygen, for example, is very high.
Yeah.
I lost my climbing partner.
Oh.
Because he was pushing the limit. Yuli Steck, who is quite a famous mountaineer who was definitely pushing the limits of what's able to be done solo at height and technical. He also passed away. Not didn't pass away, I should say. He fell to his death at Nuptse, the mountain that I just talked about, which is next to Everest and Lhotse, while I was there in 2017 also.
Oh, it's very sad. Were you there when your friend passed away? Were you on that climb with him?
No, so basically we climbed together on Lhotse, which is the mountain next to Everest. Tried to climb that. It was the third time, in fact, in 2017 that I went to climb Lhotse, and we were climbing just together. He's an Argentinian guide who I've known for quite a while because he used to live in Argentina. And he is a very accomplished climber. We were climbing together on Lhotse to climb without oxygen. So we'd become we're good friends for a long time anyhow.
Yeah.
But we've become obviously really good friends because we'd spent about 6 weeks climbing together in Nepal. However, I got quite sick on that trip, so we didn't make the summit. And then after I came home, he went to a mountain which is in Pakistan called Nanga Parbat. And that mountain is, again, over 8,000 metres, but it's very technical, one of the more technical of the 8,000 metre pit. There's no sort of easy climb up it. And him and his Spanish climbing partner picked one of the hardest routes to do, which had only ever been climbed once before, which is called the Mizuno Ridge. It's basically the longest ridge in the Himalaya at that height, like 13 kilometres. So they died in an avalanche on it.
Oh.
Yeah, it's obviously hard to have someone, a climbing partner pass away. I mean, it's not the first time.
From my research that I did, pretty much every mountaineer that I looked up had some kind of story very similar to that. And it's horrific. And I just think, I don't know how I would cope if that was my field. I don't know if I would be able to keep going on, especially if it's a situation where you're there and it happens and you've witnessed everything. I can't imagine the trauma that goes into somebody from that experience.
Like, I have watched people pass away on the mountain from various things. It's hard to explain, I suppose. Like, I have a similar maybe mentality to a lot of my friends that are paramedics. Like, you can distance yourself from it.
Okay. Oh, that makes a lot of sense, I guess, when you think about someone that's a doctor or a paramedic.
Yeah, like a doctor or a paramedic, they deal with that like every day on the job, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, sometimes it's going to be more traumatizing than other times if it's someone very close to you. And that would be the same for a paramedic if they came to a car crash and it was their friend, for example.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that is why I do things the way I do and try my best to mitigate risk. And I have, lines that I know not to cross, if that makes sense, personally.
Yeah, okay. Can you explain the 8,000ers for people that don't understand what that means? Because I've done a lot of research. I know what an 8,000er is, and I know how amazing it is to climb.
I just kind of fell into climbing up high just from my background living in South America, and just climbing as much as I could and guiding at altitude. It just was like the next thing, if that makes sense. Like, I was like, I'd never really had a fascination with the Himalaya or was obsessed about it or had read lots of books or anything like that. But I just sort of was like, well, I've been climbing now in the Cordillera Blanca on mountains of 6,000 meters, and I'd done a couple of sort of climbs where I felt really comfortable to not have a rope. So either on my own or with a partner, but without the rope on not like super technical terrain, but moderate technical terrain. And when I became like confident in that type of climbing, I just thought, well, the next thing for me is to climb higher. And that's why I first went to climb an 8,000 meter mountain.
What was the first one you did?
So, I mean, in terms of 8,000 meter mountains, like I could list all of them for you. I've never been to Pakistan. Yeah, I'm just trying to get back to the question. I'm not sure exactly what else I can sort of give you about the 8,000 meter mountain round. All I can say is like my sort of experience with it. Yeah, so the first mountain I went to climb was in Tibet.
Okay.
And back in the day, which is 2007 now, it was fairly cheap to climb in China or Tibet. So that's why I picked that one.
Ah, okay. That was a pretty simple reason. I was thinking there was probably a lot of background to that.
No other reason except for that, because I was working as a guide, which in Australia is one of the lowest paid, I think the second lowest paid industry or something like that, believe it or not. Even though you have all this responsibility and things to keep people alive, it's not paid very well. So I didn't have a lot of money at the time, and I just saved my pennies. I was also working in South America. I was kind of like living and working in South America and Australia just as a guide, and I was saving my pennies for it. And so that's why I chose to climb in China, because it was cheaper than Nepal.
Okay. And when you're talking about how much it costs, is it quite expensive to do these climbs?
Yes. And I don't want to think about how much money I've spent on them to date, because it would be embarrassing.
Yeah, well, you know, if it's something you love, it's not.
I haven't spent any money really on anything else since I started to climb, essentially. So I never bought a house.
So is it the climbing equipment that's expensive, or actually going and doing the actual climb? You have to pay a certain amount to do it. Is that right?
Yeah, so I mean, there's permit fees, depending where you go. So I can't speak for Pakistan because I haven't been to Pakistan yet. But in Nepal and China, the permit fees are fairly high. Like, for example, Everest, just to have the piece of paper to be there costs $10,000 US.
Oh my gosh.
Get nothing with it. They say you do. Apparently have a liaison officer that you're paying $3,000 to have at the base camp and kit out and pay for their food and clothing, etc. But I've never, ever met my liaison officer.
So $10,000 to get to the summit, right? That's not for base camp.
No, it's just a piece of paper. It's nothing.
No, but if someone's going to base camp, they don't need to pay that? Or is that for everybody?
Yeah, trekking to base camps is essentially 1,000 rupees. That's just, but we have to pay that anyhow, like when we go.
On top of your $10,000 permit.
Yeah, but it's hardly anything. Like the trekking into the national park, there's an entry fee.
Mm-hmm.
Hardly, it's like $30 or something like that. But the peak fees typically for any other 8,000 meter mountain, they're around $2,000 US.
Wow. Okay, so Everest is right up there.
Yeah, so the things that are expensive, like for me, it's cheaper because I don't go with a guided company. Climb for myself, kind of thing. But if you're going with a guided company, it'd be very, very expensive. But the expensive costs would be the base camps. So hiring or being part of a base camp where you have a tent, can leave your stuff in while you're on the mountain. When you come down, you have someone there who's cooking for you. And it's pretty hard to not have that.
Yeah.
not just for the climbing part, but it's kind of part of the thing in the fall or China. Like you kind of have to have, like employ people. It'd be very difficult to not have that base camp set up, basically.
And is that expensive?
Yeah, that's the most expensive part. Exactly. Because they have to get all of these tents and employees and food and etc. into the middle of nowhere, essentially.
So say one time going to Everest to try and summit, would you say maybe about 20,000 US dollars would be sum it up?
No.
More than that?
Personally, I can tell you how much it costs me.
Yeah. I am fascinated. I never thought it would be that expensive.
Well, so for me it was cheap, okay? And it cost me around 40,000 Australian. But that is cheap because I just climbed with another Sherpa who's from Nepal, and we didn't have a team and we just stayed in someone else's base camp. Now, if you were like a client on an expedition that you were being guided, you could pay up to 120,000 US.
Oh my golly gosh.
People remortgage their homes to do it, let's just say.
And then there's a chance that you can die.
Well, there's probably, like, Everest has now got the least risk.
Okay.
Because it's so commercially guided, and yeah, they fix the ropes. There's a lot of infrastructure now.
Okay. Are you walking on a path now?
Through the snow?
In some sections. Yes, I looked at photos and it looks like people are walking on paths.
In the snow? Well, if there's lots of people going across the Western Cone, which is fairly flat, and it's the snow, then it'll look like a path until it snows and then there's no path, and then someone makes it again. Does that make sense?
Okay, yep.
It would be like cross-country skiing where someone goes in front through the snow and they make a track, and then the more people that go on their skis, then the bigger the track gets.
Okay, yep, that makes sense.
However, when you get to the Lhotse face, which is, like 45, 50 degrees in slope, then it's difficult to make a track on that.
So the first time you decided to, say, do Everest, what was going through your head? Did you just make a decision one day and just go, I'm going to do this?
Oh, yeah, kind of. So what happened was in 2007, when I first went to Cho Oyu, I just went with a very small team with a friend of mine from the Blue Mountains who was an adventure guide. And we essentially just had one Nepalese guy at the base camp with one tent that he lived in and cooked us food. That was our base camp. When we had like a tent each. Anyhow, my climbing partner during that trip, I'd spent a lot of time climbing at altitude in South America, like maybe 7 months a year.
Okay.
So I had quite a lot of experience of how my body would go and how to climb and acclimatize. And I suppose like my climbing partner didn't have quite as much experience, but anyhow, he ended up getting like frost nip on his toes, so he couldn't go for the summit attempt. And I essentially decided to go on my own. So I left base camp for 8 days and headed up the mountain and went to summit by myself.
So you had no one with you?
No. So there were other people at the camps, but essentially I was on my own. On summit day, I was completely on my own. There was no one else that went up that day to the summit. So that was quite difficult because there was a fair amount of new snow. So I had to make steps through it, which is hard if no one else can help. And yeah, so I essentially summited by myself.
That is amazing.
Yes, and I didn't use oxygen because I never even thought to to be honest. Like I just didn't even have it as an option. We didn't even have any oxygen as a backup because I hadn't really thought that oxygen was even an option because it was just over like 8,200 meters. And I thought, well, that's not that high.
Oh my gosh. I was at 5,000 meters and I could barely breathe.
Well, what I do remember, like, because high altitude mountaineering apparently kills your memory brain cells. I don't know what it's from, but anyhow, what I do remember was when I was hiking towards the summit. It's like a mile-long plateau, and it's fairly flat, and it's fairly difficult to see, like, how far from the summit you are. Essentially, you know you're at the summit because you finally get to this point where you can see Mount Everest because you're climbing on the opposite side of the mountain to Mount Everest. So you never see Everest at all until you're on the summit, basically. The proof that you've made the summit is the photo of Mount Everest from the top. And I just remember just thinking, like, I'm never going to get there. I was hiking along this, like, rolling hill this was hiking because it was fairly flat.
Okay.
I was hiking along with my crampons on to the summit, and I had to breathe so fast as if I was hyperventilating to actually not pass out. That's what I do remember, because if I started to breathe too slowly, I actually was starting to fall asleep and black out.
Oh my gosh. So that means that was so little oxygen going through your body at that point.
Yes. And just to walk, like the action of actually doing any form of exercise, it took it, if that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
So you had to breathe a lot harder just to be able to stay conscious.
And if you were by yourself, did you ever have that fear that I'm by myself right now? If something happens to me, that's it?
I didn't really know. It was weird. I think, like, at the time I was a bit sort of naive. And since then I've added a lot of things into my climbing, such as a sat phone and weather reports and stuff like that. But at the time I don't know, I just had this faith that I would be okay. I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain. Yeah, it's the difficult thing to explain. I felt very comfortable. I was a little bit scared that I was by myself. I also didn't feel so scared that I would turn around, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does make sense. And I think you had so much determination that you were just going to make this happen.
It wasn't just determination. Like, I felt confident. Like, I didn't feel like I was out of my comfort zone.
Well, I think if you're at the point where you think you're going to pass out and you're just like, nope, not going to do it, not going to do it, keep going, keep going.
It's hard to explain. Like, I don't know, like, it was uncomfortable, but in terms of, I guess, like, the experience I'd had up until then, I was confident in my skills, but I was also fairly lucky in terms of the weather. Like, if the weather had changed while I was up on that plateau, it would have been a different story. I was just lucky I didn't have any clouds come in. I could find my way back because I didn't have a GPS or anything at the time to retrace my steps. And plenty of climbers have died on that plateau, unable to find their way back to the camp.
My heart is racing right now just listening to your stories.
No, I mean, like I said, I was lucky, and then I have got a sat phone and a GPS and a few other bits and pieces to negate a few of the risks that I just happened to get away with on that first trip.
So you get to the summit and the view? Yeah,
the view was amazing. I was like, there's Everest, yay. And basically I took my selfie. Back in the day, it was kind of like selfies weren't a thing back then, but I had to take a selfie to prove that was me and that was Everest in the background, just to get my summit certificate, I suppose.
Is there a big sign up the top to tell you that you're at the summit?
No, the Sherpa is place prayer flags in a huge pile.
Ah, is that what those flags are?
Yeah, you feel like Everest has grown by a metre because there's so many of them on top. Well, not just prayer flags on top of Everest. There's lots of things on top of Everest, but that's the colourful things that you see.
So that's how you know you're at the summit.
Yes. Well, like I said, on Cho Oyu, there's no more up. Well, the other thing is there's no more up. Like, you can't actually take a step higher.
Okay.
That's the obvious one. But that's obvious when the sun's out. It's not obvious when the sun isn't out, because sometimes you might be on a high spot on a ridge and you don't realise you've still got to go another 200 metres.
So you left that base camp by yourself to go up to the summit. How long did it take you to get up there?
So it took me, I think it was 6 days up and 2 days down.
And where do you stay overnight?
In tents. So I was just lucky because one of my friends that guides on a mountain in South America, Aconcagua, which I've just guided now, like came back a week ago, he was also there guiding. He had some tents higher up on the mountain. So when I left base camp, I basically asked him, could I sleep in the higher camp tent that he had already? And that helped me, because it would have been quite difficult for me to carry, without having a climbing partner. I have to carry all of the stuff on my own, like the tent, the stove, the food, you know what I mean?
That's what I'm thinking. I was thinking, how are you doing this?
Yeah, so I was able to use his tent up there, and that's led to my success.
Yeah, and what success it is. Amazing.
It was quite a while ago now, 2007. And so since then, I've just been chasing the same thing and the same style. And so I kind of realized fairly quickly after that, like I almost got depressed when I came back, because I was like on such a high, and then came back to, like no money, nowhere to live, no big fanfare, just back to work, guiding, saving my pennies.
It blows my mind that you can do something so amazing and then you come back and nobody really knows about it. I can't imagine how it felt for you when you got to that top. You would have felt like the queen of the world, and then you just come back to reality and everyone's just like, oh yeah, how was your trip?
I'm like back to guiding teenagers in the bush again, and it's interesting. But I think the thing that was the hardest for me at the time was like, I felt like, oh my gosh, I've discovered the thing that I'm good at.
You found that thing.
Like it trumped everything I'd done previously, and it just felt like this is me, and I now want to do all of them, all 14. And but the reality of like, I can't, I don't have the money. Like I just cannot do it on my guide's wage. So that was probably the most depressing thing. Just being like a climber, I didn't have any business skills. I didn't know anything really about sponsorship. Like I was very naive.
Okay.
I just assumed, okay, well, I'll just pick the next cheapest one, which is Shishapangma, it's called. So I was planning to do that the year after because I could afford it. Except what happened was the Chinese government closed the whole of Tibet to climbers because of some reason. I can't remember what it was. Something to do with the Olympics. And I don't even know what it was. 2008. Anyway, something happened. Mm-hmm. I couldn't get a permit. So instead, I decided to take a couple of trips to Nepal, guiding myself. Because before I went to Cho Oyu, I trekked around the Khumbu. So I went to Everest Base Camp. Then I visited like my friends that were guiding on Everest. And so I decided, okay, well, I want other people to see this. So I took 6 friends of mine, work colleagues, over to trek the 3 passes trek and then Island Peak.
Is that at Everest?
At Everest, yes.
Okay.
And we went by base camp.
So had you already done that before this?
I did. I did it in 10 days when we were acclimatizing for Cho Oyu, and this time did it in 24 days with clients.
Okay.
Then I went again to the base camp. Again, my friends, I guided on Aconcagua with, were all there guiding on Everest. I just felt super jealous of them.
So at this point you hadn't summited Everest?
No. This was the year after Cho Oyu. And then I came back and I did another mountaineering trip with a client from Aconcagua into Mira Peak. So I spent about 50 days in Nepal. And all the while looking at Everest. And I sort of came back from that trip and I was insanely jealous of my friends that were working on Everest that I went to see. And I just decided that instead of trying to take on this mammoth task of how the hell was I going to have all this money to climb all 14, maybe if I just saved a longer for Everest and did Everest, that would be enough, just to climb the highest one. That was my logic. So I basically saved up my pennies for 3 years. In that time, I didn't even put crampons on. I did absolutely no mountaineering, no climbing at all on glaciers, no climbing at altitude, no guiding at altitude. I just essentially worked in Australia, squirreling away my money. I got a loan, personal loan as well. And I planned to try Everest without oxygen. I didn't know what that meant, really.
Okay.
Speaking of International Women's Day, the Australian Geographic Society had a sponsorship, well, they still do, sorry, a sponsorship program for women, the Nancy Bird Walton sponsorship program. Was a famous Australian woman who was the first pilot to fly commercial planes here.
Ah.
So the award was named after her. Anyhow, so I found out about it and I won it. So I won $5,000 towards my trip, which was a great help.
Woohoo!
Yes, and I actually also gained another sponsor for my trip who just read about me because they read that in a newspaper. And they had 3 daughters and they just thought I'd be a good role model for them. And then their family company gave me some money also towards my trip. So all of a sudden I had a sat phone and I had a laptop and all these extra things I never thought I would be able to afford, which was great.
So does this mean then that the training had to start?
Yeah, I've been training hardcore for it, but just not on mountains, just here in the Blue Mountains, just doing laps up and down valleys with water in my backpack.
How much water do you carry in your backpack to train?
Well, I basically have a pack of up to 25 kilos.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I was fit for the trip. Yeah, so anyway, so off I went and I had a Sherpa. I essentially knew from Cho Oyu, I couldn't carry higher even. So the highest camp on Cho Oyu is 7,500 meters. And I knew that I couldn't carry all these things, gas, stove, tent to 8,000 because that's the highest camp on Everest, 8,000 meters. Especially if I was going to try this without oxygen. I didn't even know how much of a pack I could carry to that height. So I decided, well, I'm going to need to climb with someone who is strong and I need to expect them to carry all this stuff.
Yeah.
So I essentially need to pay them. I can't just have a climbing partner, like a mate. If I want to get there, I'm going to have to pay someone to do this job.
Yeah.
The company that I use to organise all the logistics for my trips in Tibet and Nepal found me a Sherpa called Dawa Tenzing from Tamo in the Khumbu region, which is near Namche, the Sherpa capital. And he's 10 years younger than me, but he'd summited Everest twice before, and that was good enough. Well, you know the way. And yeah, so he met me at the Lukla airport, standing there with this big grin on his face when I got off the plane, and I just thought, well, at least he looks like he has a sense of humour, and that's the main thing I look for in a climbing partner, obviously apart from the strength. So we had a great time, got to know each other. We climbed another 6,000 metre mountain first to acclimatise. We didn't have to go through the Khumbu icefall too many times because it's probably one of the more dangerous parts of Everest.
How long do you acclimatise before you start doing any kind of walking at all when you first get there?
It takes a long time to acclimatize to climb high. And the most important part of acclimatizing is the beginning. So the start of the acclimatization program, I suppose. When we talk about altitudes, high altitude is classified as over 2,500 meters of elevation. And if we're going to go anywhere that's higher than that, for example, we fly into Lukla and it's 2.8, then we need to start thinking of an acclimatization program.
Oh, okay. What is that?
Essentially, there's a few rules that can help us think about it. So, for example, there's the old move up 300 meters every day, every fourth day have a rest day, or you can move up 400 meters every day and not have the rest day. You know what I mean? So that doesn't always fit with where the villages are on the hike or where the camps are on the mountain. So what we then do is we adopt this thing called climb high, sleep low, where when we have to do a big move up, we'll have a rest day and then we'll climb up or hike higher during that day, which is what we call an active rest day.
So that doesn't sound like a rest.
I don't normally have rest days, to be honest, if I'm climbing myself. So I go up high and come back. So when we go up high during the day, we come back and we sleep low. That helps us to acclimatize. And then we do the big move up, you see.
Oh, I get you. So you just go up and then come back and then you go up and you stay up.
Correct. So when you're looking at trekking, then you need to look at the heights of the villages or wherever you're going to camp, etc. Think about that principle because that's the baseline rule, if that makes sense. How are you going to work it out? Like, okay, well, if we have a rest day here, then we're going to feel better when we go over that high pass. Or
when I flew into Cusco in Peru, that is, I don't know how high, it's over 3,000, I think, Cusco City is. And I struggled. I didn't expect to struggle as much as I did and feel it straight away. But as soon as I got off the plane, I could feel my breath, the shortness of breath. And my hostel was just up a little hill in Cusco City. It took me literally 10 minutes to get up this little hill because every few steps I had to stop to catch my breath. And I was blown away by how much it had taken my breath away, literally. And I couldn't believe it. But then after about 3 days, I was pretty good.
You felt it.
But it took me at least 3 days before I could breathe.
So that's when the use of Diamox is really good because Diamox helps you to acclimatize from the beginning. So what you could do, like if you're flying into somewhere that's high, like that example, is start taking Diamox a few days beforehand and it starts to acclimatize you prior to getting there. So you would actually feel better when you got there.
Is that a medication?
It is, yes.
I did. I'm pretty sure I did. And it still got me. But I never really go up high.
If you hadn't, you might have got sicker.
Ah,
you see.
Oh, yeah, okay.
You're just finding it difficult to walk around. But people often get off the plane and they get sick and they actually have to immediately go down in altitude because they're starting to get acute mountain sickness.
Yeah, okay. And it's very common, isn't it? And you just don't know if it's going to hit you or not.
It's very common if you have no idea of acclimatization.
Yeah.
and you have no sort of plan or anything, like for example, you got there, had you then gone to trek high, then you most probably would have got it, but you decide to stay and have a rest day. And when you sort of first get to altitude, the first few days are like the most important. And what they say is like when you first begin, not to overexert yourself. So let's just say you got there and then you went for a run. Well, then you're more likely to bring it on. If you get there and you go out and have a big party with your mates and drink a lot of alcohol and then you fall asleep.
Yeah, alcohol's actually really bad, isn't it, for altitude?
Well, not once you're acclimatized, but It suppresses your heart rate and your breathing in the night. So you're not getting enough, like your body then can't speed itself up to, which it naturally does, to acclimatize, and then you get sick. So the first few days are kind of like the crucial where people can stuff it up. Especially big drinkers. and the same thing is taking sleeping medication. You know, like people might take sleeping medication because they want to get over jet lag and they're at altitude, and it does the same thing as alcohol. Slows your body down when you're asleep, you see.
Okay, so anyone planning to go, maybe do base camp at Everest, do not do that.
Don't party at Namche on the way up, party at Namche on the way down.
Yes. So there is a lot of people now wanting to do base camp. What are the things that's really important for them to know just to do that hike to get, well, is it a hike? Is it a climb?
It's a hike.
It's a hike to base camp?
That is one of the things that you said, oh, does it annoy you when people say you're a trekker? What annoys me is when people say climb to Everest base camp.
Okay. All right. So give me a bit more of an example. I haven't done it, so I need you to tell me about this because I know there's a lot of people doing it.
We've done Everest. And I'm like, are you sure? And they're like, well, we trekked Everest base camp. I was like, but no, that's not done Everest or climbed Everest. Sorry. It was a bit of a difference.
Yeah. Okay. Give it to me. Tell me, what's the differences? I mean, obviously I know one's a summit and one's base camp, but to get to base camp, is it still a hard trek?
It's like a highway in terms of what the track is like.
Oh.
Because so many people go in and out, and trains of yaks bringing things in and out of the base camp, food, tables, tents.
So yak being the animal?
Yak being the animal, yeah.
Okay, so you're not just being offensive to people like, yeah, you silly yak.
No, there's horses lower down on the trail, like where yaks can't go because yaks have to live at altitude or they die.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep. So yeah, there's horses lower down. It's super dusty. The thing that's hard about it is the altitude, not the track itself.
Okay, so is there an actual track?
Like you can run on the track.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, compared to trail runs up here, the track is fairly good and easy. But it's the altitude and the dry, cold air that gets people. Mm-hmm. And the dust.
Yeah, okay.
The yak dust. The yak dung dust.
So it is basically an actual track, though, to get to base camp.
It is a definite track. In terms of a track for me, I would call, because I do a lot of off-track walking, it would be what I would call a highway of a track.
Oh. So the level of danger on that?
On the track itself?
Yeah. Is there a level of danger? Like, are you on cliff faces or?
Goes along the sides of cliffs, but it's wide where it does that, obviously, because yaks walk through. Porters go with huge, big planks of plywood for the lodges, so they fit. So the only danger would be if there's a team of yaks coming, you need to get out of the way, or they could push you off the edge. So we always go to the high side of the track as the yaks pass. That's a good top tip. And then they go underneath you, so they can't push you off the cliff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's scary. When I was in Peru, we had to walk on a little tiny track, which was literally the size of my foot. So I had to put one foot in front of the other. You couldn't go side by side. And that's when it started pelting down with hail. And so it was icy. And it was the scariest thing I've ever had to do. And we're just literally walking on this side. I couldn't see in front of me because it was pelting down. And my fear was through the roof, and I just started walking really slow. And that was the scariest thing that I've ever done. So that's the image I have of walking to base camp, is that kind of tiny little path that I'm visualizing.
Well, that's not the image you need to have.
Okay, all right.
You can have that image if you like. It sounds like that image haunts you.
It does.
Michelle.
It very much haunts me every day. Well, just because I've heard people say that getting to Everest Base Camp is really crazy and intense and it's the hardest thing they've ever done. I put that obviously refer that to me of the hardest thing I've ever done. And so that's the visualization, I guess, that I have come to because of that.
I think it's all relative, like depending, like, you know, what hiking experience you have. Do you know what I mean? Like for me, it's super easy. Track itself. And I've taken clients there that, like, a few of them have had really big fears of heights, and like you said, that similar type of thing, walking on the track like that, they would be terrified, and they did not have any experience of that at all on that track, if that helps you.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, obviously, like, you've got to go over swing bridges above huge big drops and stuff, but
yeah, that's scary enough just right there.
That would maybe be the hardest thing, but they're very big, sturdy bridges that yak trains walk across, for example.
Oh, okay.
I wouldn't be put off by your other image in your head.
Oh, okay. Because, yeah, when people have talked about it, I've like, no, from my experience, what I've done now, I would never want to go to base camp. But speaking to you now, well, maybe I could do it.
I definitely think you could.
Interesting.
I don't see why not. It's just trekking.
Yeah, okay.
And you have lodges, so you can quite comfortably, and in fact, you only really walk like a few hours a day. That's probably the hard part for people, because they have a lot of downtime. They think, oh, I only walks like 5 hours to this village. I'd rather go further because I want to do more exercise. But then they go too high and they get sick. So it's all about trying to just enjoy the area, go slow.
Yeah.
People walk too fast. They get sick.
We did like 8 hours in the one day. It was intense.
And that's okay. Like, it's okay to do a big day once you're
I didn't want to. That wasn't the plan.
But there's typically not really that many big days. Like, you don't have to do any big days, in fact, trekking in and out. If you don't want, because there's so many villages to stop at.
Okay.
Basically.
Oh, okay. You're making it sound more appealing to me. With people doing base camp, is there a level of training people should be doing to do that, though?
Well, it's all relative to what your experience is. Like, if you're a hiker and you're used to hiking and that's what you do every weekend, then it's not going to be too hard for you. But if you're starting with no baseline hiking fitness, then you are going to have to train, you know. So it just depends on where you're at.
And what kind of training for somebody that's never done any kind of hiking at all and they want to get to base camp, what kind of training do you suggest they do?
Well, guess what? The best training for a hike is what, do you think?
I don't know. Eating lots of bad food and sitting on the couch watching Netflix. I don't know. That's where I'm thinking.
Well, it's not rocket science. It's hiking. You can just hike around the city with your backpack and just go find hills and stairs, and if you've just got a lunch break and you're in a building, just whack on a backpack and go up and down the stairs instead of take the elevator.
Yeah, okay, that's good advice. And you think they should have 25 kilos of weight in the backpack?
Well, no, because no one's going to be carrying 25 kilos for that hike.
Oh, to Everest Base Camp, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
So how much weight should they have in their backpack to train?
Well, it depends how they're planning on doing the hike. Like, are you planning on going with a guide and porters where you just carry a day pack? Or are you planning on carrying your own pack with your sleeping bag and gear in it? It just, you need to have what's going to be realistic. The thing, like, whatever weight you plan on carrying is what you should train with, or carry a little bit more so it becomes a little bit easier when you add in the altitude.
Yeah. See, that's what I struggled with. I barely had anything in my backpack and I was struggling with the altitude the higher we got. And my guide was like, oh my gosh. And so at one point he took my backpack off me and it made a difference. And I couldn't, he's like, what's in your bag? I'm like, my camera. I don't know. I've barely got anything in it. When I got back to the hostel, I realized there was, those massive packs those massive packs of batteries, like the biggest pack of batteries you can get that, maybe 30 batteries or something, that was hidden in the back. So that's what the weight was, because they're really heavy. Yeah, so it did feel a lot heavier than, I couldn't make out why it was so heavy, and they couldn't either. They're like, this is really heavy. We found out it was the batteries later after we got back. I was like, yeah, that would have been helpful to realise that earlier. I wouldn't have been taking batteries with me. It wasn't the plan.
Oh, geez. Oh, well, you learn your lesson. You're still here. That's
I am.
The main thing.
Yes.
It's always good to learn the lesson and survive.
We are out of time for this week. Don't worry, next week is part 2. Allie goes into detail about her climb to Everest and how she summited the highest mountain in the world. Her story is riveting and exciting and sad. So please make sure you tune in for next week. Don't miss it. If you want, watch Everest in the meantime. Thanks for listening to With You Every Step, hosted by Michelle Lee. We do hope you enjoyed listening, and if you did, make sure you tell everybody. If you didn't, nobody likes a Debbie Downer. Please subscribe to get up to date with our latest releases and give us a thumbs up on our social media at With You Every Step. We love to hear from you. If you have any questions or inquiries, head to the Contact Us page at our website, michellelee.com. That's also where you'll find all our blogs mentioned in the podcast. We love to hear from you, and if we have inspired you to travel, thanks for listening. Love life and adventure on.